we will listen to, well, actually, he's the supply chain executive #1 on the top 28 of supply chain executive in Europe. So every year, together with KPMG and Inspired Search, we create an overview on personal basis. So we created top 28 of great supply chain leaders. We've done it already for quite some years, and it's quite good to see that you have great supply chain ambassadors. And I'm very proud to have the #1 of the top 28 of last year, the most recent one, here on stage. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Tariq Farooq. He is a supply chain officer of Sanofi. Here, over there.
So good morning. Some of you would have noticed that's an old video, and I'll explain why I used an old video in a second. But the key theme for the next 5-10 minutes is connecting the dots. As we've talked this morning, the world is changing. It's changing at an ever-increasing pace. And certainly, from a healthcare standpoint, massive changes happening over the last few years, not least because of COVID, and over the coming few years. So, as you've just seen in the video, aging population, growing population, unfortunately the prevalence of chronic disease going up. In the context of COVID and post-COVID, many more people needing healthcare, governments having fewer and fewer resources spread across more people. And of course, with the times of COVID, expectations of patients, consumers, customers, and so on having going up. So how do you survive and thrive in that environment? Well, you do it by innovation, which is the theme of today. And innovation isn't just a choice, it's a necessity. And many of you can think of many, many companies who are no longer with us simply because they failed to innovate. And the reason that I used the old video, A, because I think it captures quite well some of the emotions and the storytelling that we were talking about this morning, but also, if you can put the slides back up, please. Oh no, go back one. Go back one. Okay, you can't go back. Oh, there you go. Yep. One more. Go back one more. Without playing the video. It doesn't matter, stay where you are. If you noticed at the end of the video, there was a logo, a Sanofi logo. That has changed. It's changed very deliberately, and a lot of the messaging behind it is internal. Yeah, that's the old one, okay, which was very nice. And then you then go to the new one. No, okay, it doesn't matter, let's stick there. You go to the new one, so let's just focus on the left-hand side. And some people look at that and say, well, the old one was much more emotive, much more engaging, and so on. But the new one is very deliberate. It's about connecting the dots. You look at the left-hand side, and it's almost a question mark. Okay, so creating the insights, understanding the challenges, the opportunities, the problems that you're trying to solve. And then the right-hand side is the upside-down exclamation mark of the eureka moments where you solve those problems through the innovations and you implement the solutions. So it's very deliberate. And again, the theme of the next few minutes is about connecting those dots. And there's lots of different models around innovation, so I don't want to oversimplify it, but just to give my own interpretation on it, I would say, look, there are 3 key steps. One is the initial insight, the insight on what's the opportunity, what's the challenge, what's the problem that you're trying to solve, what are you trying to improve. Then there's the inspiration, looking inside, looking outside, being creative, trying to find solutions to address that particular problem, that particular opportunity, that particular challenge. And when I talk about inspiration, the first thing that I would always do is to look outside for reapplication. There is no shame in taking great ideas from other companies, other industries, other situations, because many of the challenges we face have been faced somewhere else, perhaps in a different way. And there is absolutely no shame in reapplication, renovation, and if you can bring solutions faster by doing that, then you should do that. And then last but not least, there's the implementation piece, because great ideas are great, but if they're not delivered, then you don't have the impact. And on implementation, and we'll talk a bit more about this later on, the key part of that, certainly in my mind, is convincing people for why you need to change, right? Because there's the why, the what, and the how. The what is what you're going to change, how you're going to do it, but people need to understand the why, or you need to help them to connect the dots, right? What's the problem that they have, or what's the problem or the opportunity that they face, and how this particular innovation, or this particular change, or this particular transformation is going to address those, and how that's going to benefit them. So again, the theme being connecting the dots, connecting the bigger dots, but connecting the dots for the individuals at their level as well. Because if you can't, then the innovation or the change won't happen, and it certainly won't stick. A little bit about Sanofi Supply Chain. I'll be very fast. I don't want to bore you with the details, but Martin did ask me to give a bit of details on it, so I'll do that. So we're about 100,000 people. Used to be about 1,000 different product families. Used to be about 25,000 SKUs, now about 20,000. Shifting about 4.7 billion boxes, about 1 billion vaccines. Now 70 or so plants around the world. We used to be 120. Going back a few years ago, but part of the transformation and innovation we've done is a reduction of that. Now about 250 CMOs, we used to be 500. So again, a simplification and a transformation there. And we used to be around 250 distribution sites around the world, now about 120 and still reducing, and I can talk about why we're doing that, particularly in a world where you need more resilience. That might be a bit counterintuitive, but I can explain later on if you're interested, and serving 150 countries. So that's just the scope of supply chain within Sanofi. And then if I bring that back to what I was talking before, the other thing to keep in mind is when we talk about innovation, it's not just the big product service innovations. It's the innovations that each of you and your teams do day to day on process, on tools, on systems, on ways of working. It's big innovations, it's small innovations, but all of that adds up to drive a change and to drive a transformation. And when we look across Sanofi, we've been driving innovation across the value chain, meaning how we research and find medicines, how we do clinical trials, how we innovate in how we reach clinicians and patients in terms of our commercial practices, but also innovations across the end-to-end supply chain. You know, whether that's in plan or source or make or deliver. And the sort of 5 themes that we've worked across for the last few years, which I don't think is a surprise to anybody because there's a lot of commonality for all of us. You know, one has been around becoming much more patient and customer-centric, and learning and reapplying from FMCG, where I spent most of my career, and bringing things which in FMCG, they've been doing it for the last 10, 15, 20 years, but for pharma and life sciences and Sanofi, it's an innovation, right? Is it rocket science? No, but it is an innovation, and it's helping us to serve our patients and customers better. Another area where we focused is on end-to-end integration and bringing together the ecosystem, not just of suppliers and customers, but of hospitals, pharmacies, wholesalers, distributors, and so on, and how you connect that ecosystem in a way that allows you then to better serve your patients and better serve your business. Tailored and sustainable, and I emphasize the word sustainable, supply solutions. That's one of the reasons why we reduced the number of DCs. It has allowed us to reduce our environmental footprint, and I think one of the startups were talking earlier on this morning about the impact of procurement and materials. Just in our case, 60% of our scope 3 impact on CO2 comes from not our supply chain, but the supply chain of our suppliers to get stuff into us, 60%. So anything that we can do with our suppliers that helps us to optimize and reduce that, of course, that's a big help for the planet, and it's a big help for us as a company. Lots of work on digital, whether it's integrating end-to-end, whether it's greater collaboration with our customers, whether it's how we manage our logistics and so on, and then, of course, work around our supply chain organizations and teams. But look, I'll stop there and just remind and come back to that original logo, because for me, for all of us in supply chain, it is about connecting the dots. Connecting the dots with what's happening in the world and how that impacts you, connecting the dots in terms of the question mark to the eureka moment of the innovation, connecting the dots for yourselves and your teams in why it's important for them to make those transitions and the changes and the constant organizational changes that you're making. Because if you don't connect the dots for them, and if they don't understand it, then it doesn't happen and it doesn't stick. Okay, so if you remember nothing else, just connect the dots. That's what I'll leave you with.
So thanks for now. So next, the next sidekick of me is Professor Carlos Cordon from IMD Business School. So he will have a conversation with Tariq about his work. And I've been working with Carlos for almost a decade, and we created a lot of stuff, content together. And it's also important to see that how can it be used. I leave it to you, Carlos.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So one of the things that actually Martin was very proud of is that we did some work in something which is absolutely, can you put the first one? Yeah. That you will say, my goodness, what the hell is this? Well, you know, now it's very fashionable to do an infographic. So you need to go into detail. So this is a kind of mind map about what is a digital supply chain and how do we create that. So there's one part which is about trends, impact on companies, then the right lower part is supply chain challenges, and the left part is at the supply chain improvements. Look at the supply chain improvements. You have a copy, so I don't need to go over that, but that is where the specific actions are created to try to improve. Now, what we're going to do over the whole day with some interviews, and we will start with Tariq, is we're going to talk precisely about end-to-end supply chain. This is one of the themes we're going to see. We're going to talk a lot about digitalization. There's a lot of innovation there. We're going to talk about collaboration, basically. How do we collaborate? That's one of the themes that we see coming. And then the learning organization, which is also something interesting because that means we are going to accept failing. But in supply chain, we cannot fail in any way. And Tariq is a good example. In a pharma company, you cannot make a mistake in certain areas. So that's what we're going to talk. And so what I would like basically is to use the opportunity to have the knowledge of Tariq. So let me explain. We know each other since 20 years ago, now is that? Yeah, so it's a long
2002.
time. So a fantastic career. And very recently, he took a decision that is an interesting one for us to have an interview, because he decided, and he announced that publicly already, to move on from Sanofi, from his experience. And then he has had experience in fast-moving consumer goods, in pharma. So my question to you, Tariq, will be, if you look at the last 10 years in supply chain, which ones have been the changes and the big trends that you have seen?
That's a good question. Look, I think that probably three things come to mind. One is the consumer, patient, customer expectations have gone up exponentially in that period. And particularly if you look in the last 2 years during COVID, people's expectations about immediacy, I want it and I want it now. Their expectations around, I want it now, and I want to pay the cheapest price I possibly can for it. And I think somebody talked early on about how Amazon has trained all of us as consumers, and therefore the expectations have just ratcheted up, and therefore the challenges for all of us in supply chains to meet those has gone up. So that's one. So consumer and customer expectations, because that's ultimately what drives the business and ultimately what drives us in supply chain. I think the second one would be, particularly over the last 3 years, the recognition of supply chain at board level, ExCom level, and what supply chain can bring, and how supply chain can be a competitive advantage or an enabler of value creation rather than a simple supplier, has changed dramatically. I remember about 10, 15 years ago seeing a Gartner slide, and there was a quote from a CEO, right? And I don't remember which CEO, but the quote was, supply chain is like payroll. When I get my check, I don't realize they exist. I only know they exist when I don't get my check. So if supply chain is working well, then nobody really cared, right? And that has changed dramatically, not least of which, because of the COVID period over the last 3 years, the importance that supply chain makes, and the fact that collectively all of you and your organizations have been as resilient as you are, has elevated. So I think, one, expectations have gone up. At the same time, because of that, because of the broader environment, the value perceived of supply chain has gone up. And then the last one, I think, is that certainly if I look over the last 10 years, the pace of change, the pace of transformation, and thankfully, linked to my second point, the pace of investment in terms of not just money but resources into transforming supply chains has rocketed up as well. So those would be the three biggest changes, and frankly, I think I can't think of a better time for anyone to be in supply chain, than now. Certainly, it's much more of a sexy area to be than when I started my career back in 1990, right?
But if you're saying specifically, pharma, it's typically about research. You showed the figures: 6 billion investment in research, 1 billion in the supply chain. Is this a trend that has changed? So if it's 1 to 6, would have been different 10 years ago?
That's a good question. I think that I would actually say that if I think about my previous life in Procter or Danone, perhaps particularly in Procter, we invested a larger portion of that mix into supply chain, because for Procter, I think they understood much earlier, and companies like Procter, Unilever, many of them, right? They understood much earlier the importance of supply chain and have been investing in it. I think in life sciences, it's an area which was underinvested for a long time. And what I always say is that it's not because pharma people are not smart, they're very smart. But the challenge, of course, is that when you're working in an environment where your gross margins are, okay, I'll give numbers, 75, 80, 90%, where you've got a mountain of cash, and where your customers are happy that if they ordered something on the first of the month and they got it by the end of the month, right? That's very different to Walmart or Tesco's or these guys who want it within a 30-minute slot. Then in that environment, you don't have to transform, you don't have to innovate, you can live with some of those challenges. But that world has changed, and therefore the pace of innovation and spend has gone up. So I'm ashamed to admit, if you think about the investments we made 10 years ago, probably it was half of that or a quarter of that, right?
Okay.
And they're going up. And most of those investments were not in processes, systems, tools, planning, all that kind of stuff. It was in basic CapEx for factories. And now a much bigger portion goes into those other elements.
To those things. Yeah. Now, so we have a lot of startups here. So what advice will you give a startup saying, you know, we want to create a company, we have a startup in supply chain and so on? What would be your advice? And now looking from the outside, you are not anymore in a big company, you are not anymore neither in a startup, so what would be the advice?
Yeah, look, I think, well, first of all, I was hugely impressed with the 3 startups I saw this morning, so I feel a little bit sort of embarrassed to be giving advice to them because they're much smarter than I am in many, many ways. Right?
But you're the buyer.
I know, and then so I'll give my advice still as the buyer, all right? Yeah. And then I would say, coming back to what I just talked, I would say, look, connect the dots, and I'll explain what I mean by that. You know, the first piece is really be very clear on what problem, what opportunity, what need you're trying to solve, and therefore why the buyer should really be interested, right? Because coming in, we're talking about, you know, I have features on this or I have features on that, but that doesn't help. What helps is what's the problem that people have that you're going to solve, and that's one. 2, you know, the what is unique about your proposition versus others? And that doesn't have to mean that you're the only one who does it, but there has to be something unique. You know, you do it faster. I was interested in the Garvis one where they talked about one-day implementation. I mean, that's fairly unique, right? So you need to make a big deal out of that, because for people like me, you come to me with something which is a one-day implementation rather than a 3-year, then my ears prick up. I would like to understand how the hell they do it, but my ears prick up, right? So what's unique? That's the second piece. And then the third one, I would say, again, about connecting the dots, is on the how. Rather sort of counterintuitively, the bigger the company as a startup that you're trying to get something sold into, unfortunately, the more risk-averse they are, right? I'm a lot more risk-averse being in a 36 billion pharma company than somebody being in a 50 million local company sitting somewhere else. So the how, you need to show me how you can generate a proof of concept in a way which is low risk for me, which I can then scale up. And then, so it really is about connecting the dots. You know, why, what is it that you're doing? How is it unique? Sorry, what's unique about it? And how can you make it easy and low risk for me to say yes, right? And low risk for me, certainly in a pharma context, isn't about the money, right? Because we've got shitloads of money. It's about how do I, well, not, okay, I don't want to say that too much. We've got quite a bit of money, but anyway, it's how do I minimize the risks in terms of the implementation, the impact on the business, the impact on patients, and so on. And then the last thing I would say, the last bit of advice I would give is as you think about your value proposition and what you're trying to sell in, connect with people in the company that or companies that you're going after, and don't connect at the beginning with people like me, right? I can't help you very much. Go and connect to the people who you're actually going to be serving in the end, who are going to be seeing the benefits. So in the first one with Garvis, go and find the demand planners in Sanofi and elsewhere. Go and talk to them. First of all, they'll be more happy to talk to you than probably I will. And secondly, they'll be able to explain to you all the shit they need to deal with day to day as demand planners. And you can better understand, therefore, how your proposition is going to help them. So that, therefore, when you do come and talk to me, you can talk from a context and a frame of reference which I better understand, and you can articulate the benefits in a way which are then more meaningful for me. And you won't get that from me at the beginning. You'll get it from the people that you're ultimately helping. Whether it's the demand planners or when you're talking about the sustainability, the procurement solutions, you know, go and talk to the buyers. Figure out today, how difficult is it for you to get all that information on ESG or sustainability or the carbon footprint, and how do you do it, and what could help you to do that better? And okay, and I have a tool that might help you to do it, because then you've got advocates. You help frame the connecting the dots, as I said before, and B, you've then got advocates internally who can help you to sell your case. And people like me will be much more convinced by 3-4 demand planners or procurement buyers or whatever it might be, coming in saying X rather than you guys. Sorry, I'm being told to shut up.
Okay. Last question, any other advice, any area that you would say, this is where the light is going to be over the next 3 years? And that's...
So you said this is where the
light, the area you would say, this is, talk a lot about connecting the dots. Is that connected planning? Is that, what is the area you would say, wow, if you go there, there is a gold mine of opportunities?
Yeah, look, that's a very good question. It's a difficult question to answer, and I don't want to, particularly when we've got so many pitches happening today, I don't want to steer the direction to one particular frame. But what I would say is certainly the biggest challenge I see is not lack of ideas or lack of opportunities. The challenge is the implementation of those. And certainly with my experience at P&G, Danone, and at Sanofi, in the end, it comes down to the change management and the delivery, because as I think we were talking yesterday, if you remember, 90% of digital transitions, they fail. Not because of the tool, not because of the benefits it can bring, but because you did a shitty job of the change management, you didn't get the adoption, you didn't clean up the data or whatever it might be, and you didn't, coming back to where I finished before, you didn't connect the dots for management, and you didn't connect the dots for the users to make that change stick. Right? So I personally would rather go for a solution which is only 70% good, but it's implemented and used and delivered the benefits, rather than something which would have been earth-shattering, but nobody ever bloody uses because you can make it stick. So I think if there's one advice I would give is really, really think about change, leadership, adoption, and how do you take your organization and your people on that journey with you, and how do you build the talent that you need down the road. And then in terms of the specifics around, do I think the biggest opportunity is in planning or logistics, whatever, who knows? Well, I have a view, but I don't want to pre-frame the voting later.
Thank you very much,
Hey, my
Tariq.
pleasure.
Thank you. Let's give him a hand. Thank you very much. Thank you.